I used to believe that after 35 years of marriage, you knew the person sleeping beside you better than anyone else on earth. I believed trust, love, and shared history were unshakable foundations. But I was wrong. One evening, Robert, my husband, my partner, my companion through decades, walked into our home with his tie loosened and his face strangely blank. He didn't sit me down gently. He didn't stumble over the words like a man burdened by guilt. We're about to give a business presentation, and delivered a single sentence that shattered everything I thought I knew. Elaine, this isn't working anymore. I want a divorce. I remember staring at him, waiting for the punchline, waiting for some flicker of hesitation in his eyes, some shred of the man who once swore forever to me. But there was nothing. His voice was flat. His expression was cold. And in that instant, I realized the truth. Robert had already left me in his heart, long before his lips formed the words. For 35 years, I had been the anchor of our home. I cooked, I cleaned, I stretched our income when times were lean, and I celebrated with him when times were good. I raised our children with patience and love. Our house wasn't just walls and a roof, it was a living scrapbook of our life together. Every inch carried my fingerprints. The curtains I stitched myself. The garden I coaxed into bloom. The porch where we laughed with friends. The armchair where I rocked our babies to sleep. And now, with one sentence, he had cut me out of the story entirely. I asked him why. Why now? Was there someone else? He shrugged, as if my pain was an inconvenience. He muttered about needing space, about how he deserved happiness. Happiness. What about mine? What about the decades I had given, the sacrifices I had made to build a life with him? The papers arrived quickly after that. Too quickly. He moved through the process like a man rehearsing steps he already knew. Within weeks, the divorce was finalized. I found myself folding clothes into boxes, walking through rooms I thought would cradle us into old age. I left behind the garden I had tended, the kitchen I had poured my soul into, the photographs that hung on our walls. And then, as if the knife weren't already buried deep, I learned the truth. Robert hadn't just left me, he had left me for someone else. Her name was Clara. She was young, much younger than me, bright-eyed, energetic, and carrying the smug glow of someone who believed she'd won a prize. And where did Robert take her? Straight into our house. The very home I had built from the ground up, brick by brick, memory by memory. Neighbors told me they saw them painting the porch together, laughing as though the place had always belonged to them. Clara planted flowers in my garden. She rearranged my living room. She slept in the bed where I once lay beside him. Every update felt like another stone pressing down on my chest, heavier and heavier, until I could hardly breathe. The humiliation was indescribable. To walk past my old home and see Robert, my ex-husband, standing on the steps with another woman, waving to neighbors, as though my years there had meant nothing. To hear whispers behind my back about how quickly he had moved on. To watch Clara glow like a victor while I stood invisible, erased from my own history. It was as though the ground I stood on had vanished. I was left floating in a cold, empty void. I was supposed to start over, but how could I, when every corner of my past life was flaunted in front of me? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Robert and Clara laughing in my kitchen, clinking glasses in my dining room, building a new future on the ruins of mine. And yet, even in that pit of despair, something inside me refused to die. I didn't know it then, but the very house Robert thought he had claimed with his new bride would one day become the key to my revenge. The burden he never saw coming. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake in my small rented apartment while the city breathed around me, the silence pressing in like a tide. The fridge hummed too loudly. The clock ticked too sharply. No matter how I rearranged the furniture, the place never felt like home. I missed the creak of our stairs, the way the morning sun would spill across the big kitchen window, the scent of roses from the garden I had tended for decades. Those weren't just comforts, they were proof that I had existed, that my life had left prints somewhere. Without them, I felt invisible. And Clara, she wore my absence like a crown. Neighbors would drop hints, little barbs wrapped as gossip. "She's hosting dinner tonight in the dining room," one would say. "They repainting the porch," another would whisper. I heard how she laughed too loudly, how she rearranged my furniture, and told anyone who'd listen how lovely her home felt. It was humiliating in a way I couldn't have prepared for, to see your life staged by a stranger, to watch your memories performed as someone else's new beginning. I wanted to scream, to march back to that porch and pull the curtains down, to shred every cushion she'd sat on. But I didn't. I smiled politely when neighbors waved. I nodded when people offered sympathy that felt more like curiosity. Let them think I was broken, I told myself. Let them believe Elaine has nothing left. But here's the thing they didn't know. While Robert and his trophy bride thought they'd written me out, I was quietly reading the script they'd signed. When the pity calls stopped and the late-night loneliness set in, I began to study the divorce settlement the way a chess player studies a board. Every clause, every line of fine print, I read them over and over under the yellow light of my kitchen lamp. I wasn't looking for comfort. I was looking for leverage. And then I found it, tucked into the pages like a secret key. The house wasn't entirely his. The judge had awarded him primary possession, yes, but my name stayed on the title. I still had equity. I still had rights. The realization hit me like lightning. Robert thought he'd erased me. He thought he could waltz back into our life with a younger woman and pretend the past didn't belong to anyone. He had left a door cracked open, and I was ready to step through it. I didn't know the exact plan that night. I only knew two things. I would not be invisible, and I would not allow them to build their fantasy on the ruins of my life. If Robert had thought I was a burden before, he'd badly underestimated what baggage I could drop, and how heavy it would feel when it landed right on him. So I sat at my kitchen table, cup of tea gone cold, and promised myself one thing. This story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Stay with me, because what I did next stunned everyone who thought they knew me. Once the truth about the settlement hit me, I couldn't shake it. It was like a secret drumbeat under my skin, the hum beneath every thought, the rhythm of every heartbeat. I still had power, but power means nothing unless you know how to wield it. And for decades, Robert had worked hard to convince me that I was powerless, that I didn't understand money, contracts, or business. He'd reduced me to a role, the quiet wife who cooked meals, kept the house tidy, raised the children, and polished his ego until it gleamed. He made me believe that without him, I was nothing. Now I had the chance to prove him wrong. The very next morning, I marched down to the local bank. My hands trembled slightly as I slid the papers across the desk. My wedding ring long gone, but my name still etched on that deed. The loan officer adjusted her glasses, scanned the documents, and then looked up with a calm but knowing smile. "Mrs. Turner," she said softly, "you may have more options than you think." Those words lit something in me. Options, possibilities, doors I thought were locked forever. She explained that because my name was still tied to the title, I could demand my share of the equity. And if Robert couldn't buy me out, I had the legal right to force a sale. At first, the thought of selling the house chilled me. That was my home. Every corner still echoed with laughter, birthdays, late-night talks, even arguments that had shaped our family's story. It was my history written in wallpaper and floorboards. Could I really erase all that? But then I pictured Clara, her smug smile while she hosted dinners in my dining room, her footsteps on the porch I had painted by hand, her flowers growing where mine had once bloomed. And suddenly, the thought of stripping it all away didn't feel cruel. It felt just, for the first time in months, my spine straightened. I left the bank with a folder of notes and a spark in my chest that felt dangerously close to hope. On the walk home, I rehearsed the confrontation in my head. Robert's smug grin slipping, Clara's painted smile faltering, their fantasy cracking at the edges the moment they realized the house wasn't theirs to keep. But I knew I needed more than confidence. I needed proof. Evidence that Robert wasn't just careless with me, he was careless with the house itself. So I called Marjorie, my old neighbor 2 doors down. She was the type who noticed everything, whose trash bins were late, which flowers bloomed, who argued on the porch. I asked casually, like I was just making small talk. "Oh, honey," she chuckled, "you wouldn't believe it. The yard's gone wild. The paint's peeling. And between you and me, they've got deliveries showing up at all hours. If you ask me, they're living way beyond their means." Her words were like fuel to my fire. Robert, who had once obsessed over keeping the lawn trimmed and the porch spotless, was letting the place fall apart. That wasn't just neglect, it was weakness. And weakness meant leverage. That night, I spread the papers across my little kitchen table again. The numbers, the clauses, the options, they hummed with promise. For years I'd been told I was too weak, too old, too naive to stand up for myself. But here I was, holding the cards, and I finally knew how to play them. I would make Robert an offer, buy me out fairly, or face the sale. Either way, Clara's little kingdom was about to collapse, brick by brick. This wasn't about petty revenge. It was about justice. About forcing Robert to face the weight of what he had thrown away. And about teaching Clara the lesson she had never expected, that you cannot build a happy ending on someone else's broken pieces. The storm was brewing, and this time, I wasn't the one who was going to get soaked. The next Saturday, I finally faced them. I had rehearsed this moment in my head for nights, but nothing could fully prepare me for stepping back into that house. My house. Robert had invited me under the pretense of talking things through, as though I were some fragile ex-wife desperate for scraps of civility. But when I walked into the living room, I saw the truth laid bare. Robert sat stiffly in the armchair we once picked out together. His tie loosened, his eyes narrowed, and beside him, Clara perched like a queen on a throne she hadn't earned. A smug little smile painted across her face, as if she'd already declared victory. She thought I had come crawling. She thought she had won. But I didn't sit down. Instead, I placed a neat folder on the coffee table between us. The sound of it landing was louder than it should have been, like the crack of a gavel. Robert frowned, leaning forward to reach for it. "What's this?" "Options," I said, my voice steady as stone. "Either you buy me out for my fair share of this house, or I'll file for a sale. The law gives me that right." For a heartbeat, silence swallowed the room. I could hear the tick-tick of the mantel clock, each second stretching longer, heavier. Clara's smile twitched, faltering at the edges. Robert blinked, then let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "You wouldn't dare," he scoffed, trying to sound confident. But I leaned forward, meeting his gaze without a flinch. "Try me." The air in the room shifted. Clara stiffened, her voice cutting in like a blade. "But this is our home," she snapped, her tone shrill with panic. I turned to her, my words slow and deliberate. "No, Clara, it was mine first. Every inch of it. The memories, the sweat, the years poured into these walls, they belong to me. And if you think you can erase me from it, you've underestimated me." Her painted confidence cracked. For the first time, she had no quick retort, no mocking smile. Robert, though, knew exactly what he was looking at. His eyes flicked back to the folder, scanning the documents even before opening them. He had seen enough contracts in his life to recognize what those papers meant. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew the ground he thought was solid beneath him had just begun to crumble. And in that moment, it wasn't me trapped in silence anymore. It was them. I straightened my shoulders, letting the power settle back where it belonged. "You have a choice, Robert," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Treat me fairly, or lose it all." The words hung in the air like a verdict. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't need one. Their stunned faces were all the confirmation I required. Turning on my heel, I walked out of the living room, out of my house, with my head held high. And this time, when the silence closed in, it didn't belong to me. It belonged to them. After that confrontation, I braced myself for Robert's knock at my door, papers in hand, ready to bargain. But instead, there was only silence. A week passed, then two. Each day, I expected the phone to ring, expected his pride to crumble just enough for him to negotiate. But nothing. And in that void, something unexpected happened. My patience turned into power. Then, one morning, my phone lit up with Marjorie's name again. I answered, and her voice dropped to a whisper, the kind people use when they're about to spill secrets. "You won't believe this," she said. "Robert and Clara had a fight in the front yard, loud enough for the neighborhood to hear. He's behind on bills. Elaine, big bills, and Clara, she's furious." I froze, the words sinking in like a slow drip. Robert, the man who strutted through life as if nothing could touch him, falling behind on bills. For the first time in months, I nearly laughed. It explained his silence. He wasn't ignoring me because he was strong. He was ignoring me because he was weak, because he couldn't afford to buy me out. Later that same day, proof landed in my mailbox. A letter from the bank. My name was still tied to the property, so I got a copy too. Missed mortgage payments, warnings, threats of foreclosure. I held the letter in trembling hands, but this time it wasn't grief making me shake. It was fury. My home, the place I had built my life, was being run into the ground. Clara's so-called dream was cracking apart, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. But here's the thing, I wasn't cruel. I didn't want to see the house destroyed by their recklessness. That house had been my heart once. So, I picked up the phone and dialed Robert. He answered quickly, his voice already taut, as if he knew why I was calling. "Elaine." "Robert," I said evenly, "you got the same letter I did. You can't keep up with the payments, can you?" There was a pause, a long sigh. "It's just temporary. Business is slow, Clara's expenses." I cut him off, my tone sharp. "Enough excuses. You're out of options. Buy me out, or we sell. Dragging your feet won't change the math." For the first time, I heard it in his voice, fear. "Elaine," he said, quieter now, "you can't do this to me." My blood boiled. "To you. You brought another woman into my house. You called me a burden. You erased me from the life I built. And now you're begging me for mercy." He fumbled for words, muttered about appearances. The kids, the neighbors. It was pathetic, and yet strangely satisfying. This was the same man who once looked me in the eye and said I was nothing. Now he was pleading with me to save him. "I'll give you 1 week," I said coldly. "Either find the money, or I'll start the sale." And before he could answer, I hung up. That week dragged on like a lifetime. Each morning I woke half expecting some miracle, some last-minute rescue. But there was nothing. Clara disappeared from the usual neighborhood gossip circles, and Robert avoided eye contact with anyone who might ask questions. Finally, on the 8th day, my phone rang. His name lit the screen. My heart pounded, though I already knew what he would say. His voice was heavy, defeated. "Elaine, we can't do it. We can't buy you out." I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. I had dreamed of this moment, of him admitting failure, of him admitting I held the power now. And yet, deep inside, a small ache remained, because this wasn't only about revenge. It was about reclaiming the dignity he had stolen from me. "Then you know what happens next," I said quietly. "I'll begin the process." The silence that followed told me everything. For the first time in decades, Robert Turner had no power left, and I finally did. The weeks that followed felt like living in someone else's house. I walked down the halls of a place I had built, yet every corner echoed with laughter and whispers that didn't belong to me. Melissa had already rearranged the furniture, changed the curtains, and even swapped out the family photos with ones of her and Daniel. The walls that once held my story now displayed theirs. And Daniel, he didn't even seem to notice how much of me was being erased. One evening, I sat in the living room chair that had always been mine. Melissa walked in, holding 2 glasses of wine. She glanced at me with that polished, fake smile of hers. "Oh," she said, "I didn't realize you'd be here. Daniel and I were about to watch a movie. Do you mind?" It wasn't a question. It was a dismissal. I stood up slowly, holding back the sting in my chest, and walked to my bedroom. That night, lying awake, I thought about all the sacrifices I had made. The late nights working overtime, the skipped meals so Daniel could have what he wanted, The years of saving just to pay off this house. And now, I was being treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home. But resentment wasn't all I felt. A seed of resolve began to grow. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Mr. Graham. He had been a family friend for years, someone I trusted. I explained what was happening, how Daniel had effectively pushed me aside, and how Melissa seemed determined to erase me entirely. Mr. Graham was quiet for a long moment before saying, "You know, you still hold the deed to the house, right? Your name alone. Daniel may live there, but it's yours legally." The words hit me like a strike of lightning. I hadn't thought about it that way. I had always considered the house as ours, a family home. But legally, it was mine. "Are you suggesting what I think you are?" I asked carefully. "I'm saying," Mr. Graham replied, "you have options. Options that could change everything." For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of power return to me. That day, I walked through the house differently. My eyes no longer saw just the erasure of my life. They saw assets, rights, leverage. Melissa's smug expression, Daniel's dismissive tone, all of it would come crashing down when they realized what they had overlooked. But I wasn't going to rush. No. Revenge, I thought, was best served calculated and quiet. I began to observe them carefully. Melissa had expensive tastes, designer bags, spa trips, constant online shopping. Daniel, meanwhile, was blind to it all, desperate to please her, even if it meant ignoring how she chipped away at his finances. It didn't take long to see what kind of future they were building, one where Melissa lived lavishly, and Daniel footed the bill without realizing how unstable it all was. And that was when I made my decision. If they wanted the house so badly, I'd give it to them, just not in the way they expected. The following weeks became a quiet performance, and I played my role to perfection, the invisible old woman in the background. Daniel and Melissa thought they'd won. They paraded around the house like triumphant actors on a stage they assumed had no authors left. But I was in the wings, watching every scene, waiting for the exact moment to step forward. Every morning, Melissa preened like a peacock, tags still on the labels, paper bags stacked by the door. "Daniel, we need to redo the kitchen," she cooed one afternoon, voice all syrup and entitlement. "This old style is unbearable. If we want to entertain, the house must reflect us." Daniel nodded like a schoolboy desperate for praise. "You're right, love," he said. "I'll call the contractors." I sipped my tea and listened. Inside, something cold and fierce unfurled. Us. There was no us. That house had been built on my nights, my wages, my back, and the audacity of a newcomer to claim it as her own was more than galling. It was an insult. That night I unlocked my desk and pulled out the deed. My name, clear as a bell, legally binding. Daniel's name was nowhere on it. A calm washed over me. The truth wasn't in their noise. It was in ink. I went back to Mr. Graham with a new steadiness. "I want to sell," I told him. Plain, decisive. He raised an eyebrow. "You sure? That's drastic. Where will you go?" "If they won't see me here," I said, "then let them have what they wanted, my absence. But when I leave, I'm taking the ground out from under their feet." Mr. Graham gave me a look, one that mixed admiration and warning. "I'll handle this quietly," he promised. "When the time comes, they won't see it coming." The plan was set. I returned home and slipped back into the role they expected. A soft smile at dinner parties, polite applause when Melissa announced future plans for renovations. I let them think me defeated. Let them breathe easy. That complacency would be their undoing. Then Melissa crossed a line. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil, coaxing the roses I'd planted years ago back to life, when she approached, heels clipping the path with irritated precision. "Evelyn," she said too sweetly, "Daniel and I were thinking, maybe it's time you considered a retirement community, somewhere more appropriate for your age." I blinked dirt from my nails and laughed, not out loud, just enough to make her mistake me for frailty. "Is that so?" I said. She pressed on, mistaking my calm for weakness. "You'd have friends your age, activities, staff to help, don't you want that?" I straightened, leveled my gaze at her. Garden dirt on my gloves, history in my bones. One day, I said slowly, you'll realize the foundation you're standing on isn't as solid as you suppose. She frowned and drifted away, muttering. She had no idea the papers had been signed. No idea a buyer with cash in hand had already been found. No idea that in a matter of weeks, their kingdom would be only a memory. The day came and I signed the final documents with hands that did not tremble. The house, the repository of birthdays and broken nights, the witness to my life, was sold. My chest felt lighter than it had in years. It was closure, not loss. When I returned, I walked every room slowly, touching the banister, the windowsill, the corner where a child once hid toys. I wasn't saying goodbye in sorrow. I was saying goodbye with a quiet victory. That evening, Daniel and Melissa burst in, excited about a new sofa they'd ordered. They barely noticed my suitcase by the door. "Mom," Daniel blinked, confused. "What's with the bag?" "I'm leaving," I said, calmly. Melissa's face lit up, immediate and nasty. Finally, she breathed. Before they could celebrate, I slid a sealed envelope across the coffee table and met Daniel's eyes. "You'll want to read this carefully," I said, then turned and walked out. Inside that envelope, the notice of sale, the transfer of ownership, the clean legal proof that their supposed home was no longer theirs. I did not look back. I did not need to. Behind me, they would discover the ground had been taken away. The house that once tried to erase me was my last act of authorship. Their comfortable life would crumble in the silence I left behind, and for the first time since they'd taken my place at the table, I felt heard. The next morning, I sat in a small cafe down the street, the kind where the air smells like fresh croissants and burnt espresso, waiting for the storm I knew was coming. My phone buzzed across the table like a restless insect, first once, then again, then again. By the 10th call, I finally picked up. "Mom, what is this?" Daniel's voice cracked, raw with panic. "Some man just came to the door with papers, he says. The house isn't ours." "What did you do?" I took a slow sip of my coffee before answering, steady as stone. "What I did," I said, "was reclaim my dignity. That house was mine, Daniel. You tried to erase me from it. So, I erased you instead." "Mom, you can't. This is insane." His voice rose, frantic now. "Where are we supposed to go?" For the briefest moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered the nights I lay awake in silence. The way he and Melissa had looked right through me in my own home. My voice stayed calm. "That's not my problem anymore. You and Melissa made it clear I was a burden. So now, you'll carry one of your own." The silence on the other end was heavy, suffocating. Then came Melissa's shrill voice in the background, sharp as broken glass. She wasn't just angry, she was terrified. Because without that house, without the illusion of stability, she had nothing. I hung up. Later that week, word trickled back through the neighborhood grapevine. Daniel and Melissa had tried to fight it, scrambling for loopholes, begging for extensions. But the sale was airtight. My lawyer made sure of that. 30 days, that was all they had. 30 days to pack up their designer clothes, their overpriced furniture, and their arrogance, and walk out the same door they once tried to shove me through. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. My silence was its own victory. The moving day arrived with gray skies. I stood across the street, arms folded, as the truck backed into the driveway. Melissa barked frantic orders, her hair frizzing in the damp air, while Daniel moved like a man dragging chains. At one point, Melissa spotted me watching. Our eyes locked. I offered her a small, satisfied smile, not cruel, just final. She quickly looked away. The irony was sharp enough to taste. They had stripped me of everything: my home, my comfort, even my role as a mother, and yet here I stood, watching them lose it all. They weren't just losing a house. They were losing the very foundation of a life they thought they'd stolen. When the truck rumbled down the street for the last time, I whispered to myself, barely above a breath, burden lifted. That night, in the quiet of my new apartment, I allowed myself something I hadn't in months. I allowed myself to feel peace. No more whispered gossip. No more walking on eggshells in a home that wasn't mine. No more pretending I didn't exist. But peace, I discovered, has a curious side effect. When the noise fades, when anger finally loosens its grip, something else begins to surface. Memory. And memories are the one thing no court, no betrayal, no revenge can erase. The echo of laughter in the kitchen. The way sunlight spilled through the big window on summer mornings. The creak of the stairs under small feet. Those weren't theirs to keep. No matter how many times they tried to take my place. Those belonged to me. Always would. I had fought, I had lost, and I had risen. And though the house was gone, the woman inside it, the woman they tried to bury, was finally standing tall again. A few weeks after Daniel and Melissa finally left, I went back one last time to the house before handing the keys to the new owners. Walking up the path felt strange. The roses I'd pruned for years were gone. The porch swung silent. Inside, the rooms were hollowed out, stripped of the family clutter that had once made this place alive. I stood in the center of the living room, the same spot where I'd decorated Christmas trees, hosted birthday dinners, patched scraped knees, and watched my boy take his first wobbly steps. For a moment, the memories pressed in like a tide. I could almost hear tiny feet on the stairs, the sound of holiday music, laughter spilling from the kitchen. The house was full of ghosts. But then I thought of Melissa's sharp laugh as she strutted through the rooms, of Daniel's distant shrug when I asked for help, of the way they decided I was a burden. Those images cleared something sharp and cold in me. This house hadn't been sanctuary for a long time. It had become a stage for them to parade my life away. Selling it wasn't losing. It was cutting the chains. I left that day lighter than I'd expected. There was no dramatic speech, no final glance back. I closed the door, handed over the keys, and felt the rush of air like a small liberation. The house, all its memories and pain, didn't define me anymore. Daniel called. Of course he called. The voicemails piled up, half apology, half plea, and an undercurrent of anger that sounded more like entitlement than remorse. He asked where he and Melissa were supposed to go, bargained for time, offered apologies that were mostly about appearances. I never answered. I had nothing left to give him. No shelter, no sympathy, no money. Instead of sinking into bitterness, I poured the time and energy I'd once spent tending a home into myself. I joined a local community group and started walking by the river at dawn. I signed up for a painting class I'd always wanted to try but never had time for. Every brush stroke on the canvas felt like a small reclaiming color where there had been only cold silence. One afternoon at the cafe, the same table where I'd taken Daniel's frantic calls, I overheard a young woman sigh about her own mother. "She's always in my business," she complained. Her friend said, "At least you still have her around." That line hit me harder than I expected, not because I longed to be back in Daniel's life, but because it reminded me of a truth Daniel and Melissa never admitted. Parents are not burdens. They are messy and imperfect and irreplaceable. You don't discard them without cost. Melissa and Daniel made their choice. I made mine. My apartment isn't grand, but it's mine. The plants on the sill are thriving. My books are in order. I sleep without the ache of pretending to be smaller than I am. Neighbors sometimes ask if I regret selling the house, or if I miss what I gave up. My answer is always the same: no. A burden only weighs you down if you keep carrying it. I finally set mine down. The truth is, Daniel thought he had sentenced me to shame and helplessness. He didn't realize I had the power all along: the paperwork, the right to my equity, the resolve to reclaim what was mine. In taking back the house, I didn't just take bricks and a roof. I reclaimed dignity, independence, and a future that belonged to me. So when people ask what happened, I smile and say it plainly. My son sent me away because he thought I was a burden. I gave him a real burden he'll never forget, and I gave myself something far better: freedom.